What is up, everybody? Welcome to today's stream. And I told you yesterday that I was going to talk about my review strategy for a paper. And actually, this is my review strategy for a paper, but that addresses a really important, I think, the nightmare of every academic, that you're basically working on a paper and somebody has come up with the idea already. So does that happen? What do you do when something like that happens, right? So in a paper that I'm doing for a small journal, where I talk about how leaders can manage volunteer performance and how that they sort of tap on this on something I call the serious leisure to develop people's skills, and as they develop people's skills, people increase their commitment to the organization. And one of the reviewers just sent me a bunch of references saying this has been done before, useless paper. And so I'm like, okay, let me look at these references. And all of these references are quantitative papers that show that if you provide employees training, the turnover is less. Okay. Now, what I did is I looked at these studies and said, okay, so what is going on here? Okay, and how is my research different from what is going on here? And what I saw here is that first, these papers, they don't explain how training improves loyalty other than it's an exchange. So I get training, so that means that I need to reciprocate with loyalty to my organization. And I'm really opening the black box of this mechanism. Second, that these papers look at training as something that improves people's career chances, whereas I look at training as something that actualizes people's need to develop their skill, to become a masterful practitioner of a specific practice. So different mechanism. First, I'm opening the box, not establishing a causal relationship, and I'm looking at a completely different mechanism of what is going on. So basically what I will say is that previous literature has shown that this happens. The main mechanism that where training increases retention is because it improves people's career chances. I'll show an alternative mechanism that is especially useful in volunteer organizations where people are not worried about their career chances, where basically people are self-actualizing a skill. There you go. So the reviewer thought I had a problem, but I didn't really have a problem. Now, I had a paper recently that got a very generous revise and resubmit decision from a journal. Okay? And this paper was a literature review, and the journal said, okay, there are other literature reviews, maybe that don't include all of the papers that you include, but they exist. So what I did there was I turned the paper into something I called an analytical literature review, meaning a literature review that is not trying to map an entire field, but is trying to address a research question. So I sort of like reframe it around that, and I got a really positive. And this is a mid-range journal, not one of the best, but also not a small journal, like strong journal. And they were happy with it, so I transformed it. Couple of friends had a paper that was basically exactly the same as a paper that was just about to be published on the same journal that they sent that paper. And basically, what that required of them, this was a qualitative paper, what that required of them was, rethink a little bit the framing. But you always do that in a qualitative paper anyway. So what I basically mean to tell you is that, especially with specific papers like literature reviews and so on, it is likely that, somebody has done this before. Now, maybe they've done it in a way that is different from what you have done, or they have reviewed a different set of papers, or they've done it so long ago. So, for example, I have a literature review on improvisation published in 1999. Somebody did the same thing 10 years later. That's okay, right? But you can always frame your paper around existing papers. Obviously, this is more difficult to do with quantitative papers. That because if you have a paper with the same variables, it's a paper with the same variables. There's not much you can do. So obviously, it's important to pay attention to what's going on in conferences and so on. But those papers, they require far less, setup than a qualitative paper, right? So, you're basically doing like a one-shot survey. These are relatively quicker projects, and and eventually you can do follow-up surveys or redo your survey in some other way that works around an existing paper. And obviously, if you pass the first round of revise and resubmit, then you're all set, right? So what I want to tell you is that, this happens, but this is not at all different. It's just one more reason that reviewers can use to tell you that you need to reframe your paper, to rewrite it in a way that it is an original contribution to a piece of literature. Now, what hurts sometimes is that there is a contribution that we want to make and another paper has already made it. Okay? I once read a conference presentation that I thought was doing what I wanted to do in a paper, but it wasn't. So that was a little bit of a scary moment. But if you think about it, it's your baby. It's something that it's a point that you wanted to be the first person to make. But that doesn't mean that that your data is useless. It just means that you have to reframe it and come up with an idea that is more different and more novel than what you had in mind when you first prepped the paper, right? So overall, what I want you to take out of this discussion is that a paper with the same idea of yours is just another reason that reviewers will use to ask you to review the theory or the framing of your paper, okay? If you find it before submitting to a journal, you're just basically, cutting one step in the review process because they are going to ask you to do this, right? But it is something that is matter of fact part of our job, right? Rewriting papers, reframing papers, rethinking the theory of the paper, coming up with a better contribution. That's what we do in all of our review processes, and this is just another reason. So what happens if you find a study that does the same thing? Well, you do what you do when you get a letter from a reviewer and say you need to come up with a different framing for this data. You come up with a different framing for this data. So that's it, right? In my case, fortunately, the reviewers were wrong, so I can still have the contribution that I want to have it. I just need to write it in a way that is persuasive and that I can convince the reviewer that, okay, I've read this literature and I'm treating it with respect. But after that, I can still lay the stake on the ground that I wanted to lay on the ground. This may sound obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me when I first started facing this fear. So I just wanted to share it with you in a useful way. Hope everybody's having a great time. I haven't sold any more books, so we're still on 7. But that's hopefully the start. Anyway, thanks so much. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. And tomorrow, actually, we are going to have a discussion that Marta one of my most loyal viewers suggested, which is a discussion about relevance. How can you make sure that your research is relevant if you really care about that? How can you make sure that your research is relevant for managerial audiences? And we'll discuss that tomorrow. I think I've been actually pretty successful at doing that, so I'm pretty proud of what I have accomplished. So we'll do that tomorrow. Okay, guys. Hope you have a great day, and good luck with all your projects.